All right, welcome. I am pleased to host Doug O'Loughlin from Fabricated Knowledge, one of my favorite Substack columns discussing all things semiconductors and AI. So welcome to the next episode of Non-Consensus Investing. I'm Ram Ahluwalia, your host and Chief Investment Officer at Lumida Wealth, where we specialize in the craft of investing in alternatives. So in this podcast, we're going to draw back the curtain to reveal the strategies employed by the best in the business so that you can also invest beyond the ordinary. Doug is the mastermind behind Fabricated Knowledge. It's a top-rated tech newsletter. He decodes the semiconductor industry. We've been very much focused on semiconductors because we believe it's one of the best ways to play the rise of AI. You've got a bunch of players at the application layer, whether it's Meta, Google, Once Inflection, now Microsoft, now MAI-1, and others spending on compute, and that flows down to semiconductors. We love picks and shovels plays. So Doug, after his career at a Texas firm, Bowie Capital, where he's focused on long-term investing, he had an interest in semiconductors, especially the changing landscape with the end of Moore's Law. That inspired him to launch Fabricated Knowledge to dive deeper. The rest is history. So, Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk about semiconductors, especially in the context of investing and AI. You know, I think that's really where I shine in terms of making it make a lot of sense simplistically. Because there's one thing to understand all the technical details, but it's another thing to understand, like, hey, this is really the one KPI for business that matters. Like, this is how it becomes. This is how it becomes a business model. There's a lot of places we can start, but honestly, I want to start maybe with one of my first posts ever that truly got me into this. I was working at Bowie Capital, learning about semiconductors on my own, really pushing in the whole thing, and I kind of really hit Moore's Law ending being this giant insight that I thought was, inevitable. And when that was happening, like, let's just make this extremely simple. I thought, and then at the same time, I also thought AI was going to be a big deal. And so let's think about it this way. It's really just price divided by quantity. Okay, like or rather like supply demand. Okay, the demand was growing exponentially, and supply was going to start slowing because of the end of Moore's Law. What does that imply for the price of semiconductors? Upwards. And maybe it isn't price per se. There, that's like a very high simplification, but I do think it's true. And what we've seen so far is that semiconductors has had a whole new life after being a very mature industry for over 40 years. All of a sudden has become, a whole new breath of fresh air, and that's mostly driven by AI. So just starting there, that's like the big top-down level way to think about semiconductors and AI, and being this giant pick and shovel when Moore's Law has ended, and becoming the strategic important piece in order to enable all the future of AI. So,
and now we have a new kind of law. Maybe it's Jensen's law. And it's even faster than Moore's Law. Do you want to double click there?
Yeah, sure. More than happy to. I don't even know. Yeah, I don't know what to quite call it, but essentially, if you think about it, we've been trying to scale out these systems bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the ways we have been doing that is by, this is in the beginning, there was something called parallel computing. Okay. This was the original thesis that Jensen had, was that essentially all of our workloads, the way that they're done on CPUs is like a single track. But what if we could split the task and make it into many, many different tracks all at once? And that would be a lot faster way to speed up any type of big workload. This is what Jensen means by accelerated compute. And so now what we've done is we've used GPUs, which are highly parallel, and then we're trying to scale out as many GPUs in, as many parallel threads at once in order to do these huge, infinitely large problems. One of the things that's been really interesting is we're starting to see that happen outside of just the chip. In the past, it was a pretty simple solution on making a better, faster chip, and that's by shrinking it, right? If you shrink it, the electrons get pushed back and forth not as far, so it takes less energy and it's faster. But the problem is we started to run into laws like asymptotes of scaling. So what we're starting to do is we're starting to scale that outside of just the chip. And I think NVIDIA's presentation at GTC really showed system level scaling in a way we've never seen before, and especially intelligent levels of design scaling that are much larger than just the single chip. So
Great.
that's been like this huge new vector and been really exciting and awesome to kind of follow along. We can dive into the specifics of the GP200, but also want to give you an opportunity to talk about whatever you want to. So
Yeah, no, let's get to the NVIDIA. But yeah, I think to put a bow on it, look, we're seeing GPU compute productivity versus cost curves improving at a faster rate than Moore's law.
yes,
We're getting more compute on GPU per dollar. It's declining rapidly. Used to take an incredible sum of money, hundreds of millions of dollars to build an LLM. That cost is dropping remarkably. And I think to your point, compute is a kind of currency, and compute also is intelligence. So that is the new form of value, is access to compute and how we organize and make decisions. You had this really beautiful article shortly after the NVIDIA GTC conference. I've got it shared on my screen. I'm going to read out some of the highlights here. And you say, imagine the data center as a giant chip. It is just a scaled out advanced package of the transistors of memory and logic for your problem. Instead of a multi-chip SoC, each GPU board is a tile in your chip. They're connected with copper and moved together as closely as possible so there's more performance and speed. So, you go on to say, in the case of data center as a chip, you would try to package everything together as closely as possible for as cheap as possible. You get into hardware-based memory, which we'll talk about as well. So can you lay out, your thesis, the data center as a giant chip and what that means for NVIDIA and the industry?
yeah. So what's really great about covering semiconductors and technology is, frankly, Jensen has been saying this for years. I feel like I finally hit me across the head and I really understood it this time. Pretty much, if you think about it, the same problem that happens at the nanometer level is also happening at the data center level. It's all like an identity of performance to power, and and essentially changing information. So if we're going to scale it up in order of magnitude, the first order of magnitude is advanced packaging, right? Putting multiple chips together as close as possible, right? In the we used to have it just on a piece of PCB and it'd be pretty far away. They don't really talk to each other as fast. And so we thought, well, why don't we just shove them all closer? And that's the example of how AMD won client from Intel. But Jensen and Nvidia is taking this one step further by not just by pushing two chips together, but also pushing as many chips together into a single rack. And then also within that rack, making sure that it's connected with copper specifically, because copper is extremely cheap, fast, and pretty much doesn't need more power to transmit signals. Whereas if we push to optics, we need a lot more power to transmit a signal. So think about it this way: that's just another level of advanced packaging. Now, instead of having two chips together as close as possible, which is advanced packaging, we're having as many racks as we can as close as possible. And by doing that, we essentially get the same benefits we did with Moore's law, meaning less energy, it's cheaper, and it's faster. And so might not be the perfect example of this, but at the keynote, he talked about how in the past it would take 8,000, I believe there's something like 8,000 GPUs, or maybe 16,000 GPUs to train a GPT-4 level model. But with the GB200, it would take 1/4 the amount of GPUs. And so that's the example, because by pushing all these things together, we're able to make it so much more power and performance that we're having essentially another level of scaling that's outside of just the chip. So
yeah, no, I think it's kind of remarkable. Like most semiconductor firms sell chip or some kind of equipment, like chip equipment testing. NVIDIA is selling data centers. That's the way to think about this. They're playing the game at a different level. AMD is trying to sell graphics cards and GPUs. And NVIDIA has delivered an integrated system where if you're using the NVIDIA ecosystem, you get more out of it. For example, things like InfiniBand, which are the light speed ways to communicate information across chips, even the integration of the cooling. They have the digital twin. You step into the equivalent of a multiverse to see your data center arranged. And it takes time to build data centers. there's a lot of risk in being late and risk of cost overruns. So if you can buy a data center at a click, it adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I think I think there's also even a lot of examples from history that creates that helps make this much more compelling. So if you think about it, this is actually not anything new. Before, like let's go back to history and talk about the big waves of compute. Okay, the last wave was obviously the smartphone. The wave before that was the PC. But you know what? There was a wave before that that people forget quite a bit about. It's called the mainframe. And the mainframe, in a lot of ways, was the product that NVIDIA is pushing today. It's a highly integrated, solution-oriented process that at the time was the absolute best in class. And so in the same way that NVIDIA is selling its GB200 or essentially an opinionated data center, it's kind of pursuing this old semiconductor concept of deep integration and specialization. And so this is, I'm sure you've heard this concept of everything is just bundling and unbundling and a pendulum between the two. And this is an example where I think we're starting to see NVIDIA push a really hard bundling that is kind of really clever against the whole ecosystem. Because up until now, if you think about the last paradigm, which was maybe let's say CPUs in a data center, right? CPUs in a data center was the vendors selling to the CPU. Sorry, give me a second. The vendors selling CPUs to the cloud guys were pretty much merchant off the shelf products. And the whole goal here was not to have the most performant, but the most performant versus price. NVIDIA has been able to essentially circumvent everyone by pushing their own proprietary standards and opinionated version of the world. And so maybe it is, or maybe it isn't the best, the best possible data center we can possibly make. But right now, by being opinionated and pushing all these custom integrations together as quick as possible, we're able to have the best possible compute today. And meanwhile, everyone else is scrambling in these consortiums where it takes multiple players and they're kind of fighting it out. Like,
Yes.
are we going to use our AMD GPU with the Broadcom switch? And whose fabric are we going to use? Like, are we going to use UCIe or Ultra Ethernet? And versus NVIDIA is like, no, none of that. We just come to you with the solution. It's already done. We already figured out all the engineering things. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to have your vendors to fight against each other to come together in an open ecosystem to give you a solution. NVIDIA just gives you the solution. And so
right. No, I agree. It's a fantastic point. Now, NVIDIA has a view of the world. They have a thesis on how you execute compute at scale. And the answer is the NVIDIA framework and their components, how they interact. And it delivers a lower total cost of ownership versus, say, the Broadcom view of the world, another really compelling company. And we'll get to custom silicon. And I love your mainframe metaphor too, because now we also have the rise of edge computing, which people really are not talking about, moving compute and AI to, say, mobile devices. But the other vision of the world is, say, the Broadcom view of the world, which is more networking driven. Do you want to draw a contrast between those two?
Yeah, let's talk about Broadcom really quickly. Let's think about the bottom. The bottom. Okay, before we even begin, let's talk about network architecture of a data center, right? Maybe a little heavy topic to begin with, but think of it as a giant, like the typical is maybe like a full fat tree, meaning that at the top there's these switches, and then at the bottom there's leaves. Okay, the leaves are the individual pieces of compute, like they're like a rack of data center in a data center. One of the problems is that in making these bigger and bigger models, we're not able to do it in one GPU anymore. We actually need to scale it out over multiple racks. And so there's two visions of the world. One is from the bottoms up, which NVIDIA is doing. And NVIDIA is essentially making concentric circles around their GPU, maybe starting with CUDA and the software ecosystem, then NVLink, which is like a coherent domain of copper at the rack, and then InfiniBand, which is fighting against Ethernet. But like I think NVIDIA has bets in both places. And so they're coming from the bottom of this leaf, of the leaf in the tree, okay? And they're trying to go up and essentially create bigger and fatter leaves so that you don't need to use the whole tree. And versus the other way is Broadcom. Broadcom is the historical, and to be clear, Hock Tan is no joke.
He's the CEO of Broadcom.
Yeah. CEO of Broadcom. Hock Tan is a killer. Okay, there are so many anecdotal stories of how how much he raises price. And everyone always thinks Broadcom's moat, or rather their because they have essentially a monopoly on switches, is going to be broken one day because Hock Tan is just a very cost driven guy. But the reality is Broadcom is an organization that has done a lot with very, very little. And so the Broadcom view of the world is, hey, we have the switches. We control the trunk of this leaf, okay? All the top level switches. And then they're starting to sell custom compute. They're trying to sell the leaves. And in this vision of the world, Broadcom gets to, sell the leaf and gets to sell the spine, but importantly, they want to spread out as much as possible. And so there's like this kind of balance between literally a top-down versus bottom-up solution. The top-down being Broadcom and the bottom-up being Nvidia. So, and to be clear, Broadcom has an amazing, very well-articulated strategy in this. But at the same time, I still think, Nvidia is really the company to beat. So
I agree. Although I do think Broadcom is winning position number 2 in terms of the battle of custom silicon, and then race number 3, I guess AMD, and then there's all the rest like Intel, and obviously they're the wafers. We'll come back to all that, like the edge compute as well. But yeah, look, I mean, I think that you have this other quote. You say Nvidia as a kingmaker and the 3-headed Hydra. Nvidia really is a kingmaker. I mean, they're also creating their own demand by funding startups like Inflection and CoreWeave, and who they deliver GPUs to can influence product releases, which drives market cap. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that? I'm going to share this graphic that you have too.
Yeah, let's do that, because I think that's and I'm actually going to quote my friend Dylan Patel at Semi Analysis, because he was really the first person to talk about the Amazon aspect particularly. So Nvidia kind of cut off Amazon's access to GPUs, and in the H100 era, they really didn't get much. And this kind of put them in a laggard position, right? If we're talking about the hyperscalers today and their cloud strategies, Google has the vertically integrated TPU plus Gemini product, right? Microsoft has the big partnership with OpenAI. Meta is pursuing the Llama open source version of this, and is has a lot of compute and able to do this. And who the only company of the big hyperscalers who doesn't have their own kind of frontier model that they own? Or well, I guess Apple, but I mean, Apple's a consumer hardware company, and I think they're actually going to be folded into the Google. I think that's like a rumor, but we'll see. I believe they're going to be buying Google Compute, but it's actually Amazon. Like, where's Amazon's where's Amazon's giant model?
What's it? Infinium, Tritanium.
Oh, the Tranium and Inferentia products.
That's
but
right.
Those are pretty bad, to be honest with you. I don't think you can train a frontier model on them. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Right. And I think part of it also is, this goes into the custom silicon topic. There's a question around, hey, look, these hyperscalers, these big tech companies are spending 100 billion plus each on GPU compute. They know they're spending a lot of money. They know NVIDIA's got an 80% profit margin, and they're trying to approach that thoughtfully. So we're seeing players like Google and Meta, which are working with Broadcom, develop custom silicon. There's reportedly a third player, rumored to be perhaps Apple. We'll find out perhaps when Broadcom reports.
I believe it's the MTIA chip at Facebook.
Oh, is that right? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So does custom silicon represent a threat to NVIDIA GPU compute, or is it that custom silicon is focused on lower end compute activities that are more highly specialized? For example, used by Meta for like ad targeting, or used by Google to enhance search, as opposed to do high ROI compute?
So I think this is a really interesting debate. I wrote about tech monopolies going vertical like years ago, and essentially like the thesis was that like, hey, these companies would go vertical with their own accelerators and have they would be able to push an opinionated vision of the future, right? Realistically, this battle has kind of ended up becoming the battle between chip design and capital. And I think right now chip design is winning, because even like, okay, so Amazon's I think their next generation product will be better, but their current generation is frankly like a little like not very useful. Maybe it's useful for Amazon recommendation engine or something like that, but like
Right.
it is just not very. You cannot train a frontier model. It's and they they probably put billions of dollars into this, and this is not there's no real products coming out the other end of that. Okay, and so the problem here is that you have to have a really solid chip design team, and the only company that really has done it is Google's CPU. I would say the Maya 100 out the gate, not very good, and probably not going to be able like that. My understanding is actually specialized to accelerate SAP workflows. So there is going to be a world where they start to have their own custom compute focused on what we'll say lower quality or lower value compute for sure. I think that will definitely happen. But I think everyone is trying to essentially create a hedge and second source for Nvidia, and Nvidia is going to be the company that pushes everything forward. And I think the hyperscalers want to be able to say that, hey, I don't want to pay this 80% gross margin, but the problem is no one is able to make a product that competes technically with the 80% gross margin, right? And so that's the definition. That is literally, I think, like the Porter's definition of competitive advantage. If you have a better product at a higher margin, yeah.
That's Michael Porter's book right here, by the way. So yeah, we read the same books, Doug.
Yeah. And I think it literally is as close to an example of a technical competitive advantage possible, because AMD made the MI300 product, right? And that product allegedly has a 50% gross margin, and it is just at parity at the H100, right? So
Yeah.
that's insane, because you're looking at a company that's able to sell you a product for 80% gross margins, and then the competitor says, okay, well, the best we can do is we can make a product that cost us 40% more, a 50% gross margin, and has parity, but it also doesn't have like all the benefits of the ecosystem. So
well said.
Yeah.
Nvidia is the leader. The leader gets the spoils. Number two does okay at a much lower margin and less market share, and the rest are fighting for scraps. And the edges are significant. We've only enumerated a few of them. And look, the reality is the market caps at stake for losing the battle for AI are significant, right? Apple has lost 20% of its market cap due to a number of reasons, one of which is that they're not AI relevant. Tesla just FOMO'd into AI. Elon's all over that now. And so look, what's 20% of a $3 trillion market cap? $600 billion. Are you willing to spend $50 billion, $100 billion, $150 billion to protect your position and impact your market cap? Absolutely, you'll do that. And it's a top three priority of the company. And the stakes are high, not just on market cap, but
I would
revenue.
say, yeah, not just on market cap, right? Like, okay, so eventually, here's the thing: is that you're going to have these models, and you can either buy them off the shelf from, let's say, the likes of OpenAI, or you can have your own, and you can insource some of that margin, and then you can use your distribution to really make a lot of money on this. I think that's the important part here, is that if you're going to be owning this extremely, if there's this extremely high value product that comes into the future and ends up disrupting many aspects of your business, you want to make sure you have some kind of say, especially in the economics, because unfortunately, if you don't, what happens is you end up becoming equivalent to like a dumb pipe. You're just distribution. You don't have the value add, right? Like in this analogy, maybe you end up being the cable provider to the media companies, and the media companies get all the value. And to be clear, we don't really know how it's going to truly shake out. But as it currently stands, most of the value, or at least dollars, that are being made in this entire ecosystem is definitely being made at the compute level. Even any of the AI startups, like OpenAI, might have like $20 to $25 million of revenue. In this point in time, it seems like the big differentiator continues to be compute. Now, will it be that way forever? I don't know. But in this current moment, if you have enough data and you have enough capital, and to be clear, these are non-trivial amounts of data and capital, you too can make a frontier model with enough compute. I would say that doesn't seem to be very, specialized. And so I think the thing that's going to become important is controlling your destiny with compute.
Well said. There's a lot there. Look, either you're a capex receiver, meaning you're furnishing the picks and shovels or the arms dealer to the category, or you're the capex payer and you're writing the $50 to $100 billion checks, which go against earnings. Better to be a capex receiver. And OpenAI, look, now they have a subscription model. They were raising money at $86 billion valuation not too long ago, but now you have free open source Meta. You have Google Gemini, free, not open source, but free. Now you've got Microsoft, it was announced yesterday, is building their own, I think it's like a $600 billion parameter model, which ups the stake yet again from Meta, which is planning a 400 billion parameter model.
Well, for example, right now, my daily driver model is Claude. Okay. Like Claude 3, Opus is a little better. I mean, maybe you can say ChatGPT 4, when it first came out was better, but like right now, I would say Claude versus GPT 4, not so much difference. And I'm definitely unloyal. I'm willing to go to the best new frontier model and I'll pay for it too. Especially if it's, if it's better. So I think
it's
the thing
early.
that's, we'll see. There's maybe the problem of business models with this, right? Because maybe let's talk about a second, like, throwing a little bit of water on the whole thing. Cause there's a really I've been a student in history. Okay. This is definitely the closest it's ever felt to the internet bubble, but I would guess that it is nowhere near as frenzied, euphoric, and rabid. But we probably are. I wrote quite a bit about this actually, looking at history, comparing this investment cycle to the past ones. The total capital spent for the telecom bubble was something like $900 billion in today's dollars. I don't think we are even remotely close to that. But we have, and that includes some M&A, right? They did acquire, there's a lot of debt, there's a lot of leverage, but that whole investment into the ecosystem for the internet pretty much made the business models of Google, Facebook, and, well, I guess not Microsoft, right? And I guess you could say, and Amazon possible, right? They needed all this infrastructure and build for this to happen. And so I wrote about this in like this history piece, essentially comparing the tech bubble to now. But the thing that's actually really scary is if we're going to put it in today's dollars, it's going to be, it would be a lot larger. Like I would be, so you can argue that from that perspective we're early. Maybe from other perspectives, the fact that no one has really shook out a really good business model. Maybe I don't know when it happens, but eventually it will turn. But at the end of the day, I do believe that AI will be a societal changing product eventually.
Yeah, no question. We gotta figure out who captures the value. I think there's a big debate on who captures the ROI on CapEx spend. And I think that's one reason why Meta's price dropped on earnings, although it's closed half the gap from that 15% drop. And real briefly on valuations, I have a chart here showing the valuations today of the S&P 500 versus 2021 peak and .com peak. We are in higher altitude territory. We're not yet at the 2021 peak. We are not at the NASDAQ peak. So in NASDAQ, you had a forward PE of 24. Today, you've got a forward PE of 21. The key thing is earnings growth. If you look at from a PEG ratio perspective, this is looking at the PE ratio divided by the growth rate. There's nothing like a bubble whatsoever. And for example, today, PEG ratio 1.32, .com peak, almost twice as much, 2.4, and in 2021, 2. So the key is earnings growth. If the earnings growth is there, there's no bubble. If the earnings growth is not there, we have a bubble. Of course, what ended the .com cycle was Cisco failing to hit their earnings growth targets. So
I would actually argue that it's a little bit more nuanced than just Cisco hitting its earnings target.
Go
right?
ahead.
Like there's I wrote pretty extensively about this. But interest rates were a big part of it as well. Don't forget that 97, essentially long-term capital management went under. And so what happened was Greenspan essentially did an emergency cut because of the fear that there'd be an international currency crisis. Okay. The telecom / internet bubble was hot in 96, 97 and cooled down a little bit on the first, as LTCM and the international, the Asia financial crisis really took its toll. But then interest rates dropped and then things went really insane. So I would argue that I would argue that it's pretty hard to have a capital formation bubble when interest rates have gone from like 0 to 5, whatever, 4.25% in the last year. And we've had all this investment. Now, the things that I think could really make things get silly and where it becomes extremely uneconomic is, let's say we go through a real rate cut. What would that do to the marginal dollar of cash on the
Right.
balance
Well,
sheet of the big five?
I think it's well
I
said.
think they
Like,
would spend it.
I think, higher rates, you discount tech firms, and that impacts pricing. I'd say the other thing is, back in the dot-com cycle, we had too much fiber, dark fiber, global crossing that was underutilized. We're putting fiber between countries underwater, across the states, wasn't being utilized. There's a difference. Today, every GPU is sold. One day there will be a glut, and as you know, semiconductors are highly cyclical, but GPUs where we stand today are not cyclical. We needed the GPUs yesterday.
Yeah, it is showing some extremely secular aspects, but I also want to kind of, so okay, let's talk about even some of the fine nuance points of supply demand. So one of the big fears, by the way, is that we add on all this new capacity. What happens? Especially because if each generation is like 2 times, like next year, if you're buying a GB200 or a B200, your dollar goes twice as far, or maybe I would say it's like 75% further than this year. And so maybe we needed all this today, but next year you could spend the same amount of money and boom, you get 75% more. Maybe that is the price cross for supply and demand. Realistically, we have an interesting case study of this, and that's Propper's Moore's law. So every single year for 30 years, semiconductors got 50% better, and we bought more. Not every single year, not linearly, but like in aggregate, we ended up buying more. So that's like Jevons paradox or something. I know.
Well, this was the old challenge that Microsoft had in the Wintel duopoly. They'd say, "Hey, look, hardware is getting better. Moore's law is in effect, but we'll keep building better and better software, and you guys have to keep up." And that actually worked out. We got more complex software, and they moved in lockstep.
Mm-hmm.
The threat of obsolescence, too. Like, if you have a faster search response on Google, you make more money. So as long as that race to be number one is there, and that might be driven by context window, the training set, as long as that race is on, it seems like that demand is intact. We haven't even talked about like defense spending on.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's happening.
I was gonna say another way to put it is, if we're gonna like truly go all Cold War, there's a chance, like, what is an ICBM of 2024? It might be the best frontier model, right? Like, eventually, if these things become like, and this is like AGI stuff, I don't know, this might be outside the pay grade of this conversation, but like, in the longer term, there's going to be a chance that you're going to be able to ping something for the cost of 10 cents, and it'll be able to do a relatively complicated topic that employs hundreds of thousands of people today, right?
You nailed it.
And so these things are extremely valuable in terms of our information processing and what that means for the future, right? Like, in a truly dystopian future war, we're talking about like nothing is real, and you're psyoping everyone, and no one knows any signals. Your phone is like texting your friends, and they're spoofing you, and all kinds of like truly dystopian stuff. If we're talking about like future of war, I would guess that AI is at the absolute top of that stack.
I agree.
And so if we talk about like, and if we're gonna go really silly, okay, defense spending as a percentage of GDP during the Cold War was like double digits. Okay, it is like 2% today. Could you argue that should be rerouted to AI? 100%, a little bit. I think there's a lot of things that it's going to.
I would argue, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and there's so many things that is really hard to explain, and this like, and I also want to maybe put like, I think it will change a lot of things, but unfortunately, societal change is almost always measured in decades, not years. But when you look up over a decade, a lot will change, and I think that's what's going to happen with AI. We might have a little hype cycle burst at some point here, where people are really disappointed that GPT-5 is only a little better, or something like that, or maybe GPT-6. I don't know which model, I don't know what time, but eventually, someday, one day, we are going to start to see meaningful improvements that are very, very hard to discount.
I agree.
An example that I can even give an example within semiconductors that I feel very confident in talking about is that. In making a semiconductor, right, the fabless designers, they have to we'll use like they have to design all the chips, right? They use a specialized type of software called EDA. EA tools are starting to use AI to make extremely non-intuitive design choices.
It's
And
like cadence and synopsis.
yes, cadence and synopsis. Yeah. And so these are like, essentially think of these as like the Bloomberg for,
Or like
for
CAD
semiconductor.
software for
Yes,
semiconductors,
yes.
right?
Yeah, and there's thousands of libraries that come together to make one of these chips. They're starting to make, and maybe I'll share my screen. I need to, I literally had this today. It's a document. But there's starting to be all of these extremely unintuitive, unintuitive abilities that machines are able to choose over us. Because if you can brute force information using just infinite compute, I think there are many, many, many interesting design choices that are not uh possible for humans to comprehend, but machines are definitely
So
like,
AI
okay,
designing AI birthing the next generation of AI.
yeah, let me share my screen here.
Sure.
And so this is X company, which I think is like one of the Google moonshots. It's not very confusing. It's not Twitter, okay? They talk about, hey, we're designing future photonics products, and then they show this AI photonics design system using conventional design and a new design using EDA tools using AI. And you can see right
Wow.
here, this is like the equivalent process between one and the other. One looks way more organic, and one is also 20 times smaller, right? You can see there are 500 450. That's essentially micron, 500 micron by 450 microns for that design versus 14 by 16 microns for the second design. And one is something that is rational and logical and understands human thought. The other is like an AI generated product, and we don't really comprehend what's going on there. And so there's a lot of examples where I think using AI, we're going to be able to brute force a lot of future advances in technology. It's maybe like a sloppier example of this is like the AI bots when they first started for video games, right? In the beginning, we crushed the heck out of them, but they started training these advanced bots on like Dota and stuff, and then everyone would be like, oh, they're superhuman. They're doing things that we never thought humans would rationally and logically do because they have so many options available to them. They get to brute force solutions, and so we're going to start to see some of this stuff happen eventually. And it will take time. It will take time to
And,
percolate into the rest of the
and if you
economy and our lives and society. But when it does, it will be an order of magnitude better, and we won't really understand how it works.
It's incredible. The technology is becoming magic. Magic being that which we see that delights us and creates wonder, but we don't understand how it works. Same way my kids interact with their iPhone. If you're a computer science engineer, you can break down the components, but we're moving into a world where the computer science engineers don't know what's going on. So extraordinary. I want to double back to a point you made earlier where you said the delivery of AI, like the pipes, they're not going to necessarily capture the ROI of CapEx spend. So who do you mean there? Like when I think of that, I think of, say, AWS. Now, I think these guys are actually going to capture an ROI on CapEx spend because we're seeing it now, right? We saw
But
the
it'll be at a
year-over-year.
marginal. Yeah, we can
Go
we
ahead.
can talk about it a little bit. It'll be at a marginal rate, and I think that let's actually talk about this little data point because I think it's very interesting and important. Um, Data centers today, right? You can buy an off-the-shelf data center design from Nvidia, and so what does that do for the hyperscalers who have the most compute? It actually dilutes their business power, right? In the past, in the CPU-centric version of the data center, you and I could not get $100 million and buy a best in class CPU farm. There was a lot of topologies, custom compute, NICs, other things that made scaling out CPUs extremely hard and not really readily available to us.
Mhm.
NVIDIA has given us the reference design. It's given you how to make a data center out of the box if you just choose all their solution. So what does that do to the incumbents who have all this data center compute? It really cheapens their current competitive advantage. And so what happens now is that as long as there's a willing amount of capital to invest in, let's say, the neo clouds, which are like CoreWeave and Lambda and like all the other new, I guess you can even argue like XAI or whatever, but all these new clouds, if they can show they have a solid ROI with like GPU uptime and committed pricing, then as long as they make an acceptable return on capital and they can go out to the public market or private market and raise capital to do these big projects, I would argue that the marginal cost of compute, the marginal ROI of compute will eventually hit where that dollar
It's a
is.
great point. So at CoreWeave, one of their primary customers is Microsoft slash
Yes.
OpenAI. So isn't Microsoft just simply packaging that as a value-added reseller? So they're still monetizing the incremental compute. They just found a more efficient provider to source the compute from and kind of delegate or
Yes.
subcontracted that function. So are they really going to be commoditized out of this if they're still the primary deliverer to the end market?
I guess, okay, so this is where distribution versus, right, because you talked about, you said AWS, and so I was just kind of making the point that like renting GPUs in a cloud or whatever, that is going to be a solved problem as long as Nvidia gives us reference designs. But going forward, right, just let's just say you, me, all of a sudden tomorrow maybe we had $100 million check, but we just made the best AI of all time. Okay. And we have it on a website and it's called Lumidia's best AI. And we have to literally go word of mouth, explain everyone why it's amazing. That is a hard growth curve, right? ChatGPT is really lucky because it had that consumer moment that really gave a lot of insight into people and to be able to like expand their distribution very quickly. Now there's many new little models, and I think right now there's ChatGPT is still the cognitive referent. So people still think of ChatGPT as having the best
early adopters
model.
on the S curve. I pulled my parents; they're not on it. You and I and others on the early part, but so we'll see. But go ahead, yeah.
But like think about it this way, right? What happens when in 5 years or something like that, you're in Microsoft Word and it's just like, okay, well, I can use ChatGPT to autocomplete this, or I can use it to reformat this, or you send over an email and it's like, you want me to automatically respond back, right? The people that have the most users today are the ones who are going to be easiest to insert LLMs into current workflows, and that distribution, right, is going to be very valuable, because even if it's, there might be a world where an 85% enough product is good enough, right? And you're purchasing it for like $5 a month or something to auto respond to all your emails. Honestly, I would love that product, right? Auto respond to my
Gmail
emails.
Super Assistant right now.
Yeah. Where it's like you press the
right.
you press the super assistant button and it's like, okay, this one automatically does it. This one I'll read and do. But like, if it's, as long as it's good enough, I think the distribution is going to become really important after a certain point. So what's going to happen is like, just like the internet kind of broke into different parts so that every different part of the ecosystem can innovate and do different things. The frontier model clearly is going to be very valuable. And whether that frontier model is sized down, sized up, whoever has like the best model is going to be valuable. But then they're going to probably sit there and license that to the actual end customers and then, charge some kind of fee. Now, the distribution here is going to be valuable. Like maybe a good example of current case studies where distribution is extremely valuable, even though there's a large incumbent, is Google pays Apple billions a year to be the
20
default.
billion. Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. 20 billion a year just to be the default search engine for all iPhones, right? There's going to be stuff like that in the future where having that end ecosystem point is going to be valuable, and you can get to gatekeep it by charging a premium or something like that. Like there will be some aspect where the distribution becomes valuable, but at the same time, this whole frontier model, new vector, is really becoming a big focus, because if you're the distributor, you still are like, okay, well, I'm at the most risk it's ever been. You're not concerned, like Google, Apple, Facebook, whatever. They're not concerned about a new website type or React or whatever, some new technology screwing over their business. No, they already are there. They're incumbents. They can invest. They can pivot. They can, what if there was like a mobile too, like a new version of mobile that came out? They would probably be the first companies to have the best apps on these products, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But the one thing they cannot do is when a truly new paradigm happens, and they want to make sure that they are not completely left out and open themselves up for this giant angle of attack they can't even understand. And so if you are the hyperscalers, the biggest tech companies that are making massive, ridiculous profits, it makes a lot of sense that as an insurance bet, it does make sense to play, right? Because what you potentially can risk is everything.
I agree.
And businesses lose during transitions. Like, one company that I'm intimately kind of familiar with in terms of semiconductors is IBM. Once upon a time in 1970, IBM was the absolute king. Okay, it was unapproachable, unbreachable that they wouldn't continue winning in computers, but they
Right.
lost. And the
No one
reason
got
why,
fired from like an IBM. That used to be a phrase,
100%. Yeah, it
right?
was the largest company. I believe at one point it was the largest company in the S&P 500. Okay, like it
It was a
was,
Buffett company for a bit. He sold that
yeah.
at a loss, but
But at the same time, like this is one of these things where it's like you can only lose during inflections, right? Because if you win the current, the last wave, the last meta, odds are you're going to be the incumbent. And so the real challenge is making sure when the shift happens, the paradigm shift happens, you're on the right boats. Okay, Microsoft has done a really good job because I think you can argue they've done three now, right? From the PC era, which they obviously crushed with Windows, right, to the
yeah,
internet era, which they like slowly got relevance back
right.
into with
They
Office
squashed
365.
Netscape Navigator by bundling Internet
Yep.
Explorer in
Yep,
the OS.
Internet Explorer, and like, yeah, maybe they weren't as strong there, but then eventually they've now leapfrogged into the third era with OpenAI. And so the problem is, this might be Google's first transition shift, right? And I would guess Google definitely seems like they'll be on the other side, but will AWS be on the other side in the same way it is today? I don't know.
This is a lot of fun. Let's go down Microsoft versus Nvidia. But real quick, one thing I would say is I think the ROI on CapEx is higher than people think because that CapEx leads to future OpEx reduction, meaning you need less engineers in 2 years' time. Meta can
Yes.
spin up a division by instructing an LLM to iterate on the next version of Instagram. They don't have to spend $10 million on HR payroll expenses. I think that's the vision that they're going to bring forward. That's one. On Microsoft, I think they actually have more at risk than Google. And two reasons. One is NVIDIA is creating a wedge for Microsoft's customers because, to your point, you and I or Saudi Arabia can go buy a data center from NVIDIA. I don't need to go rent cloud from Microsoft. And it's proprietary. I'm not subject to US government sanctions or controls, which matters in the world today. And the other is, I don't think you need a Windows operating system in the way we conceive of it today. Of course, you're going to have an OS to connect hardware to software in a BIOS and user experience of some type, but we don't need these apps in the way we think about them today. I think a lot of that is going to transform. And Microsoft, do you really need a word processor? Do you really need a spreadsheet when the AI can spin that up for you, access the data you need in a format that's ideally suited to what you're trying to accomplish?
Does it surprise you that Microsoft is the largest spender of AI compute today then?
I think Microsoft is panicking. I think two things. One is a FOMO, to your point, people doing the $100 billion CapEx spend because they need to, because the stakes are high. But Microsoft's also realizing that their bread and butter businesses, Windows
processing
and Office, like Windows Server. Do you really need Windows Server, the third business line? Not really. So I think they've got more. Like this is going to take a year or two to get priced in. It's not there now. They're obviously like the consensus AI winner. I don't think that's quite right either. But they've done well with Copilot. Like I give them credit. The traction there has been impressive.
Well, I actually will argue. I'd actually argue that Copilot it's kind of a mid product, but I
tell me more.
Okay, so,
I'm on that side of the fence too. So I want to hear the bear case.
So personally, I've never heard anyone use Copilot with an actual positive anecdote saying like, "Wow, this changed everything," and I don't use ChatGPT over it. Everyone, and I would say the heaviest users today is software development for sure. That is like the largest installed base of heavy LLM users on a day-to-day basis. They're not having them write all the code, but it is an amazing code assistant. Microsoft owns GitHub, okay, and they have a Copilot, and it definitely doesn't seem like it's better than GPT. So, but okay, and then in the same way, I also want to push back ever so slightly because this is how Microsoft is going to unscrew themselves. Is that, hey, today everyone is using word processors by Microsoft. What if they can essentially preempt the eventual, shut off of them by integrating GPT or another future LLM into their products extremely well quickly, and then you're in the same way that you can get a transcription on Microsoft Word or something, and it just kind of is integrated into every end use point for you as a Microsoft user. And so that's how I would, and like to be clear, it's a large install base, right? 300 plus million people who are paying for Office 365 every single year. And so that is not an insignificant distribution base. And I think there's a real chance that if they do it right and they get it right for business first, and they really crush it and they integrate it extremely heavily, boom, you can take away some of the existential dread in Microsoft. So that's why they're spending so much, because in their case, right, if you are just a raw information processor, because this is like what's actually happening here is information processing, right?
Yeah.
In the past, and actually I'm going to go into a little spiel about this. Regardless of if LLMs even get to superhuman abilities and we hit AGI or whatever, I don't know. In the past, a lot of the jobs that humans have been doing and are very good at is information processing, similar to what I do. Okay. What I do every single day is I intake information about the semiconductor and AI industry. I try to merge and filter insights with anecdotes, bring them together into stories, and push out analysis. That is, if you think about it, that is a pretty good LLM product. I use LLMs in my day-to-day basis, right? It can read, it can synthesize, it can process, it can point out pieces. And as it continues to get better and better, all of a sudden we can, the fear is that the information processing will be better than humans. And I think that there's examples already where it is better than humans, because information is equal to information. So let's talk about that. So for example, this video podcast, right? In this video podcast, we can use AI to figure out the transcript. Easy. But in the future, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to use the transcript to make a video podcast, right? And we're already seeing that today. Sora is a good example. It's hey, make a podcast of some, golden retrievers on a mountain and can spit out an image back to you, or maybe even a movie. And so that's an example where we've only been thinking in this one way. We need to get a little bit more creative. Any information can be put into any information. Because LLMs are really good at doing that kind of translation work. Translation is obviously a huge market that's going to be, vulnerable to this. But imagine being able to write a poem and then be okay, now write this poem in base codes using genomics, okay? And then it's use that genomic base code to synthesize a plant or something like that. That is just information in one form, passed to information in another form, passed to information in a third form, and it is actually truly able to be translated back and forth.
Right.
Yeah. And so this multimodal ability, and the multimodes that we're aware of today that we can understand and easily process is, video, text, and stuff like that. The multimodes of the future might be a lot more interesting, meaning, hey, in my text browser, make me, even in a voice thing, okay? In a voice app or something like that, where make me a customized allergy medicine using my genome. There is information on all levels that if in a sufficiently advanced AI, it will be able to process and figure that out. Now, obviously, there's a lot of concerns. There's probably a lot of
when
regulation.
that hits the market, that's when the bubble will be here. We're not there yet. I agree, but
yeah,
but that'll be the top of the market, though. But I think you're bringing up the point of agentic AIs as well. It's going from input or prompt response to AIs that can autonomously have a goal and they can run a workflow. Agentic AIs are the new microservices in kind of computer science terms. It's only a matter of time before agentic AIs do earnings transcript, retrieval, analysis, comparison, generate a report, then develop a view, and then write the Fabricated Knowledge Substack, which I subscribe to, which then you coach it from time to time. And maybe it disagrees with you. And maybe it's right. Maybe you're right. Who knows? Now, we don't know which one is Doug anymore at that point. Doug is the combination interaction of the two of you.
Yeah, I don't know. But to be clear, the thing that is so interesting about it is not, and so a lot of this right now is that we know that today it's already pretty good at a lot of things. It's superhuman at a lot of things. I frankly would take a GPT, if I had to go back to grade school and do a high school statistics test or something, I'm dude, I would, and you told me I could do it myself or I could take GPT, I would fully take GPT, right? Yeah, maybe I'll mess up, but it's better at perfect recall than I have, or a literature test or something like that. It has abilities that are already probably superhuman in terms of memory and ability to access and store information. The thing that's kind of scary is that we have a roadmap to get a lot better. That's the thing that I think is so interesting and powerful about this is we know it will get better. With more compute, it will get better. How much better? I don't know, but we know it will get better. And so maybe the edge case is that, it trains to be the smartest human ever. One human in the entire planet can match it or something like that. But if it's as smart as the smartest human ever, then like the rest of us are all screwed. So
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
and we have a long way before then,
yeah,
to be clear. And I do want to ever so slightly push back. Oh, when the
it's
bubble's
okay.
over, I don't really know. Who knows? I think trying to be like very precise of having things is like very hard to me. Realistically, every cycle is different, and we're going to
Right.
be watching on the front line of this cycle to see
Yes.
what actually happens. Um,
Well,
maybe it's
we watch GPU demand in real
yes.
time on the third party marketplace. And when that GPU demand drops, that's when you hit the sell button.
I mean, that is probably the best KPI you can do is secondary pricing of
And we'll
GPUs.
have an agentic AI track that for us and execute the orders. Well,
Yeah.
let's shift gears. And you had an analysis recently talking about semiconductor trends. I think one of the key points you made is that automotives will be in an upswing in second half. That's what the guidance we're seeing from these companies. And semiconductors have multiple areas too. There's industrials, for example. We saw MCHP report, didn't do too well. GPU has been a secular trend, been doing well. These other categories have not been doing too well. And
That's
I want to maybe you can unpack like where we are in the semiconductor cycle, which categories you think are going
cool.
to do well.
This is actually something I have something readily available to. Okay, so I really like this graph because this actually does a really good job. And I would say, outside of the AI semiconductor stuff, I am still just like an analysis dude who covers all the sectors, not just the big one right now. And you're right, automotive is in a weird spot. I literally just wrote how I thought, hey, automotive is going to have a pretty bad quarter. I think so far that's been right. Infineon just reported results were actually pretty bad. Guide was pretty bad, down for the full year. Shares are up actually, and the reason why is because you want to buy cuts in semiconductors. There's like this weird mental math to not even mental math, like this mind game of buying semiconductor stocks. Okay, you sell it when it's super hot, you buy it when it's super low. So you buy Nvidia on the crypto, earnings crash quarter, and you sell it on like the blowout quarter. And so markets are very forward looking, as you know. And so like that's the fear of AI is that okay, things are really good. The market knows it's really good. These results come in, they're really, really hot. And maybe there's a chance where earnings, revenue growth decelerates and it grows into its multiple. And I would argue that Nvidia isn't that expensive, whatever.
Or
But
maybe
this is
HBM. That might be the issue area right now, right?
yeah, well,
Micron.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say, if anything, I'm super duper duper bold up on HBM. Like there's many different segments within the semiconductor market. Automotive is one really big one, and we're starting to see pretty bad results. But I would guess that the thing about inventory cycles is they usually end eventually. And automotive has this really secular, interesting story in terms of ADAS, meaning that before our cars were pretty dumb. Now our cars are getting a little smarter. Plus, there's a little bit of electric content. And if you add it all up, pretty much a 2015 car versus a 2025 car probably has over 6 times more content. So there's this huge story in terms of, even if you buy less cars every single year, a 6x in content, that's a lot of semiconductors.
Got it. I didn't realize that. So what you're saying is, hey, look, it's not necessarily the EVs that are going to drive this automotive trend because EV demand has been declining. We're seeing that
Well,
across the
here's the
board.
thing,
Up in China. Go ahead. Yeah.
asterisk on that, because I would say EV, I mean, it's still growing, to be clear. I think EVs for this year will still be positive 20%, but second derivative, meaning the rate of growth is decreasing. And that is really important in markets because let's say like a company like Wolfspeed. Wolfspeed is a company that makes silicon carbide substrate, and they are, the largest maker in the world, but they're extremely sensitive to the end state of electric vehicle demand. And so a company like Wolfspeed is getting absolutely clobbered on an EV slowdown. And so you have to like keep all these things in mind. But yeah, right now I would say and more than just automotive, because I do think second half automotive will be the bottom, or rather we'll start to see that, and historically you want to buy the stocks before the bottom. So like, right now is kind of not a bad time. But let's talk about all the sectors in this rotation graph. I'm going to try doing this every single quarter if I don't forget. But automotive and industrial are currently the ones in the sales decreasing, inventory is increasing. I would say now after this quarter, it's more like right here, as an inventory is starting to decrease, but sales are starting to decrease. And then we're starting to see other businesses that are coming out of this trough. And this is where you kind of want to start talking about the end markets here. As it moves from here to here is usually a good time to buy. And it continues to do well as it goes from here to here. And it goes from here to here, it goes down a lot. That's usually what happens, is that when sales are increasing and inventory starts to increase, especially when inventory starts to increase much faster than sales, that's when the cycle has become extremely mature. And what happens is, at some point in time, demand goes down. And let's use automotive as an example, because automotive companies order for all this EV parts, right? But then they order to their distributor. The distributor orders from the semiconductor company, and all levels of the stack start to build inventory, build inventory, build inventory. And so if you go from 50 days of inventory to 150 days of inventory, and then the end demand market goes down, let's say 10% or something like that, all of a sudden everyone has too much inventory, because every piece of the supply chain
inventory glut, price cuts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so what happens then is like, okay, how do you fix your inventory glut? You just don't do any orders for like 3 quarters or something like that to burn down your inventory. And so we're starting to see this with automotive right now. And what happens is, even with relative, like, EVs this year are going to grow, right? EVs this year are going to still grow over last year, but there's too much inventory and the demand signal was wrong. And so what's going to happen is all the big automotive companies are going to have revenue go down double digits in a growing market. Like, that's how sensitive the end is. And so this is called the bullwhip cycle, where essentially, like, the downstream to the upstream providers, the upstream providers get absolutely whipped around on very small differences at the upstream. And so, we're starting to see this in different places, but I would say overall, the entire semiconductor cycle, things are getting better everywhere, smartphone and PC. And we'll just do, like, some quick level. Smartphone revenue growth is much stronger. PC revenue growth this year is a lot stronger. Now, to be clear, I think in the long run, that's not exactly a secular business anymore. AI, obviously, extremely freaking strong. Memory is finally having its moment.
On both of those, like, iPhone revenues declined year over year. They're going to have a new iPhone product. Is the thesis that that cycle will drive iPhone upgrades? And on PC, is the AI laptop, which people are talking about, going to motivate users without an application that we benefit from? At least, yeah, maybe it's local AI.
So
I don't know.
I don't know. Honestly, I'm going to say, yeah, iPhone upgrade cycle. Sure. I would guess that iPhones and smartphones are a mature business, meaning that volume is going to not grow. I think smartphones are probably the PCs of the early 2000s, or like maybe the late, like, 2010s, where volume growth might be essentially zero or down from the absolute peak.
Right.
It'll kind of continue to, it will kind of continue to bump along here. And the only way the smartphone revenue grows for the AI, for semiconductors, is by adding new content. Now, the ways they want to add new content, 5G, obviously, whenever you have a new type of networking device, there's a lot more complicated radio frequency parts to it that need to be added. That costs a lot more money. So maybe a 6G cycle would add more smartphone semiconductor content. But realistically, that's pretty far away. Maybe in the nearer term, they're going to be pushing AI capabilities onto the smartphone, because and this is like a big debate, right? Do you want to have local smart AI, or do you want to have AI in the cloud? Maybe in this example where you want the biggest, best AI in the cloud applications, that makes sense to me. But, like, I would really, really, really love to have, like, Llama 70B on my phone, for example. I would be very, very excited about that, because the ability for it to do, voice transcription would be awesome. Like, imagine if you just had, like, a pretty solid Llama 70B that you can use without, in airports or something like that, or like in places with crappy Wi-Fi. You don't have to have it, where it's like, hey, can you just make, like, and like, it would actually be like the best version of Siri. Be like, hey, make all this into a voice note, add whatever. Like, having that locally would be valuable. I would argue that would be worth an upgrade cycle. Now, how much of an upgrade cycle? $100 more a phone? I don't know. And maybe they can justify that. But, and then on the AI PC side, AI PCs are essentially just a current PC with an Nvidia GPU.
Right. We used to call them gaming PCs back in the day.
Pretty much the next generation of gaming PCs are going to have.
It's the application that matters, though. On the PC front, or sorry, the smartphone front, Meta may be able to disintermediate the smartphone upgrade by delivering the AI cloud, right, through WhatsApp. I mean, I'm already using that now in my day-to-day. It's just so convenient.
Yeah. I mean, but you're right. Like, honestly, non-ironically, the best frontier device that I've used in this last year is, and I'll put them away, but I have.
Oh, you got the Ray-Ban?
Yeah. And, like, they were clunky, dude. I wish they were just, I just wish it was a little better. Like, I just wish it listened to my voice better and had a slightly better model and was more responsive. But like,
My wife says that about me too, so maybe it's a good fit then.
but truly, 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 I think that there is a vision of the future where these guys are good enough, frankly.
I
We're
Yeah, I'm FOMOing over that product. Can't wait to get it. I got to go order it. Do you like that? Do you like the Ray-Ban experience? Has it changed your daily behavior?
No, not really. No, because I'm such a. I would say my daily behavior, if we're going to actually talk about adding AI stuff into things, just my smartphone, ChatGPT. So
Interesting. Gotcha. So, right, PC upgrade cycle. Look, everyone, as you know, is guiding higher. Not everyone, but like the Taiwan Semiconductors and all the names that you track in your Substack. That's because they're getting orders from the
everywhere,
end
not just
provider.
AI. Yeah.
Right. Now we just need to see, are customers going to buy what is manufactured?
Yes,
And
historically. I mean, because to be
yeah,
clear, some of this stuff, like I would say that, like, hey, our customer's going to buy. Some of this stuff is, I think there's going to be a smartphone recovery based on volumes being flat. I don't think you have to. There is a whole like think about it this way. There is the end demand, there is the production, and then there's this thing in the middle called the channel, and the channel can get really full and really empty. Think of it as a gas tank. Okay, pretty much we put it we filled the gas tank all the way to the top, right? And then we said, hey, we actually don't need a drive for the next month. And they're like, okay, well, I'm never going back to the gas station. Eventually, even at a slower level of consumption, you will have to fill the gas tank back up. And in smartphone and PC, we're finally seeing the gas tank start to be refilled.
gotcha.
And so we'll start to see this in other markets. But then there's even special places in the market where I think that things are really, really taking off. A good example is memory and HBM. I think HBM is going to be probably one of the, like, ironically, after one of the worst memory cycles in like recent
This
history.
is hardware-based memory, right?
Yeah. In the recent history, like NAND and DRAM had like 70% price downs. Not the last cycle that was that bad was 97. Like truly a horrific freaking cycle.
Right.
And maybe you can and by the way, like fun history fact, you could maybe even argue some of the Asian financial crisis was because DRAM did so bad. But anyways, that's like a whole aside.
Wow, fascinating.
But HBM in particular has become this huge new secular driver. I wrote about it in the data center AI compute thing. We'll see, and pretty much what happens is that we're going to find a way to put as much HBM into a chip as possible. And so maybe I'll stop sharing this screen and start sharing this one. But pretty much what's happening is that what we're doing is we're adding as much HBM to hold bigger and bigger models. And so right now, today, we're here, okay? This was a presentation by Andy B of Arista, truly visionary tech dude. And he's like, in order for us to make bigger and bigger models, the single biggest bandwidth limiter here is HBM. And so HBM has this very, very secular drive right now that I think that HBM volume will definitely outgrow logic volume in AI accelerators for some time yet. Price is also really, really good. And I think that there's a case that HBM could be 15 to 20% of the market of the total memory market and making much better than average margins than historical memory. And so we're starting to see this HBM super cycle, which I think is really good for memory because memory's been.
Let's break that down a bit. So, of course, Micron has backlogs going out this year and beyond. Now, the three players, right? There's Micron, there's SK Hynix in South Korea, which is the leader, 90% market share, apparently the best in the business. Nvidia is working with them. And I'm missing the third one.
Samsung.
There you go, Samsung, which is the cheapest of all these stocks too, by the way, and also
a foundry. But I'm gonna add some asterisks on this because I would love to talk about this. So I've been writing about this year to date. Just in my opinion, in this cycle, you should just buy the best. SK Hynix is definitely the most.
I would agree.
As a company. But the problem is owning Korean stocks kind of a freaking headache. They do not have an ADR. There's no ADR. We can, like, even if you have a broker that has access to international foreign markets, the one market that like you never get access to, freaking Korea, dude.
This is a use case for blockchain. Obviously, we're gonna put it on chain.
But pretty much SK Hynix is, and so like I would argue Samsung is cheap for a reason. One, it is like 40% of the entire index. Okay, it is the entire market cap of Korea. It is hard for it to get expensive without the entire market getting expensive. Second,
Well, why does that make it cheap? Like you could say the same about like
because
Maxim.
it's more a function of currency flows than actual valuation.
So that
Right?
means the intrinsic value is higher than the quoted price because
Probably,
of
yeah.
currency flows.
Yeah, but like, come on, what's your self-correcting mechanism? What, you gonna hold, like, come on, man. Have you ever done a South Korean preferred stock? That's all I have to ask. There's so many cheap South Korean, like,
I got a noodle.
hey,
It's a really interesting point. There's rumors of Meta doing a deal with Samsung. I do look. I will say this: if you look around the category, Samsung is one of the cheaper names that are
what,
out there that hasn't run. I don't own it. I'm just pointing
yeah.
out this.
So I will agree, but the problem is Samsung has a lot of levels of issues. Okay, so one, it's widely rumored and probably true that AMD's slow ramp of MI300 is actually driven because Samsung can't get yield up. That's one thing. Number two, Foundry sucks. Foundry peaked in 2020. Imagine Samsung makes phones too. Don't forget, right? Samsung has a huge business selling phones.
They're growing market share there. Yeah.
Yeah, and Samsung has in these phones they have their own chips, right? Because they can also design it. They can fabricate it. It's like if Apple owned TSMC. They have the
Right.
full vertical stack. Imagine how bad the design of your chip would be if you lost it to Qualcomm. That's what happened. They lost their own internal chip design to Qualcomm. There are real cultural and structural problems.
What does that
at
mean? They
Samsung.
lost their internal chip design to Qualcomm. Qualcomm beat them out in a competition,
Yes,
or
yes,
okay.
because it was so bad. Exynos was just not ramping. Like,
Who selected Qualcomm over Samsung? Actually, the industry
Samsung did.
overall.
Samsung did.
Samsung's phone. Their internal team who has a bias to use Samsung products, so we're going to go with Qualcomm.
Yes.
I got it. Okay.
Like, that is a blunder, dude. And Samsung has really, like,
It's
so for
yeah.
So think about it this way. That's a face plant. HBM. So in the old pre-HBM era, okay, if we were talking about like 2015 era, Samsung is number one in memory by far. They're the best in NAND, best in DRAM. 2024 era, they're the worst in DRAM. And DRAM is the most profitable, not popular, profitable segment within memory. Samsung has had many, many, many blunders in.
Gotcha. So we'll move past Samsung. I got it. There's a lot of issues around it. Someone's got to analyze and sort out how much that's pricing, etc. What about? I think there's an interesting picks and shovels play in memory around Lam Research. What do you think?
I'm a big lover of semi-cap generally, by the way. Lam Research over so let's like just do a little I think they're all really good. And actually the dispersion between all the semi-cap players is like actually a lot lower than you'd think. I would argue you should own it in a basket and you can sleep a little better at night, because just owning semi-cap companies can be very volatile. But Lam Research in particular is the leader in NAND, specifically NAND 3D etch. Okay, so they are the most levered to NAND out of everyone. Recently, they also have been doing a lot in ALD and logic, and actually, you can argue recently they're much more of a logic company. But Lam is an amazing company that is just one of the really core processes between making a semiconductor. I would even argue there's kind of a like we can even do a little asterisk here. Their biggest and best business within this process is etch, specifically high aspect ratio etch. Yeah, high aspect ratio etch. Okay. And the way that is that you're making a deep trench to make NAND memory. That's how we make NAND memory. They're bit lines, and just trench depth is the hardest thing to do. Okay. Lam won that in 2018 and was this huge market share story for them. There actually is a recent market share story out of Tokyo Electron to take some share away from Lam Research. That is the bear case. But right now, NAND spending is so low because of how dead the memory market has been that there's probably a coiled spring aspect. But I would caution you to say that in 2025, there's a real chance that, let's say, the likes of Tokyo Electron takes 20% share away from what was historically a 90% share business for Lam Research. But I don't know, not to like instantly be like no, but there's definitely nuance to all the semi-cap companies. The one I personally like the most right now, I think, is Applied Materials. Applied Materials.
I was about to go there next. Go ahead. Yeah.
The Applied Materials is like so what they're mostly known for, because each of these businesses, by the way, are oligopolies with borderline monopolies in their specific businesses. Applied Materials' best and strongest business is something called metal deposition. I believe they have 80-90% share there. There's a lot of interesting, in the same way that Lam Research might have some, headwinds in terms of share losses. Applied Materials has a lot of different fingers in a lot of buckets. They have, they're probably the broadest and widest company, and until only recently, before ASML like really took off with EUV, they were the largest semi-cap company in the world. So in just by the nature of their business, they're diversified, which I think helps because hey, maybe they're losing some share here in deposition in like etch because Tokyo Electron and Lam are making better products, but they can gain share here in ion implant or something like metal deposition. But right now, the thing I think is so interesting about Applied Materials is that there is a clear process inflection in backside power delivery, which I think is probably going to be one of the most interesting incremental processes within the semiconductor industry. Backside power delivery is like the new EUV, is like simplistically how I would put it. The tools that benefit the most from this is Applied Materials. Not going to be quite the intensity increase like EUV was, where it was, like 5 times more expensive or whatever between a DUV and an EUV machine. But it will be, there will be 20% more layers, and these layers will be much more strategic. So pretty much you could think of it as 20% more revenue in a growing market for gate-all-around and backside power delivery logic nodes. So, and especially at the beginning of the year, it was the cheapest of the bunch. But historically, I would actually say that if you want to keep your sanity, you should just own the basket, because there's really 5 companies that matter. They all, have market share stories against each of them, and they all have different reasons why they're great at existing. And frankly, within a much bigger portfolio, I think that makes a lot more sense, because over a long period of time, they all don't lose in aggregate. So I would say, yeah, that's the list right there. Applied Materials, KLA, KLAC, which is like KLA 10 core.
Right, testing equipment, also another
Yeah.
picks and shovels play like Lam Research.
Not even testing, process control, which is like whatever. I'm not gonna. That's actually maybe semantics.
Quality control, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, quality control, and then Applied Materials, which is just like the big juggernaut with a lot of different products. ASML, which is lithography. I don't think I have to explain that here. A lot of people are really familiar with that name.
Everyone learned about ASML after the Irisone conference, but it's also very expensive now. I mean, it was a great bargain last October, and the key point is, you make your money on the buy when you invest. It's a great business, but you want to buy wonderful businesses at fair prices. And, you're already seeing that lag in ASML today. We were buying this back in October. I still think it's a fantastic business, but, it's overpriced.
Yeah, a little bit. And I would argue that EUV insertion is going to decrease from here. In the same way that the second derivative is going down, the next inflections in semiconductors is not EUV, okay? It's probably ALD is an example of this, and that's actually a company that's European listed, ASM International. Really freaking confusing because it once owned ASML, and it's really it's ASMI is the ticker. ASM International. So ASM, Tokyo Electron, KLA, Lam Research, ASML, Applied Materials. Those are the big 6. ASM is actually, only recently become a lot larger. So the big 5, though, historically have had about 65% of the market share. And within 5 stocks, you can essentially just buy the future of all semiconductors.
You have good ideas and good names, and I think you touched many of the names that we own in favor. Position sizing is the hardest part in this whole category. You'll notice I didn't put Qualcomm in the leaders list. I have another list of semis here. I think I might need to, though, just given the rise of mobile AI compute. So
I'm slightly a hater. I won't lie to you.
You're a hater? You're a hater? Tell me.
Yeah,
okay, what's the bear case?
I'm a hater. So look, man, in this thing is, I think about it simplistically. How do I want to invest in terms of this, right? I want to own things that have secular content stories. And the most secular content story you can start with is real volume underneath your product, right? The one problem here is Qualcomm does not have real volume underneath its product, right? Smartphones is inherently capped. It's not going to grow volume past 0% over the next 10 years, unless if something meaningfully changes. Yes, it is optically cheap. It usually trades at the price it is at. I would argue that 17 times next 12 months is actually a much more inflated multiple than it usually trades at. I personally, and so you can add those 3 companies, Qualcomm, Skyworks, and Qorvo, are frankly they're really levered to the last cycle of semiconductors, and I really don't like them for that reason at a certain price. And if it's a cyclical bottom, I'm willing to buy it. But I think, we're probably past the bottom for all three. And I think the prices just don't make sense. So you have to really believe in secular news stories. Now there's a chance, by the way, Qualcomm is launching an ARM CPU in the second half of this year. We'll definitely start to see it. And maybe if that really takes off, that could be a real new lever. And essentially they can like in the same way that Apple has the M1 chip for its own laptops, that Qualcomm can, with its Orion CPU, can be like the M1 equivalent for all
right. I think the play is like volumes are flat, to your point. But if there's an incremental licensing revenue by enabling smartphone manufacturers to become AI relevant through a new chip design, that would be the story for Qualcomm.
Yeah, but I would have to have high conviction in that. And right now,
I'm with you. I'm not there yet either. But it's we're always trying to test our views. But overall, I think that's our kind of, we share the base case. What do you think about, Synopsys and Cadence? You talked about earlier. These are the EDAs. These are like the CAD design software.
They're amazing companies, to be clear. They're a duopoly that will never be probably breached.
So I agree they're a duopoly, but their end market is well defined. Like you and I aren't going to go design chips. The hyperscalers will design chips. Nvidia, ARM, they're going to design chips. Qualcomm's going to design chips. So what's the top line potential for these two oligopolies? Aren't they going to run to limit their growth at some point?
Let me share a graph, because this is a really important one. Pretty much, they are a take on making more complicated chips. Okay, so if you see here, what is the biggest part of this bucket? It's software. What is the biggest player in that? That's EDA. So EDA has been taking share by making, because when we make these smaller and more complex chips, like for example, backside power delivery, there's a lot of new processes that become a lot harder to test. And the only way you can do it, like think about it this way, EDA itself is a really stable, and like frankly, I do agree that maybe they might be making too much money. I would love for them to be slightly disrupted. I think it would be good for
Google's trying to compete with them with their internal EDA software now. We'll see if others try to do that too. Maybe Google.
I would say the opposite. So to be clear, the problem is anyone can make an EDA tool for, let's say, like FPGA verification for like one type of chip. Okay. But making a cutting edge chip takes thousands and thousands and thousands of different parts, right?
Yeah.
You have to have, you have to have the EDA library for every single one. And between the two, and so here's the thing is you're like, okay, well, they can make their own EDA tools, but realistically what happens is when you plug it into the workflow designs and like get it all the way to the fab, usually you have to pick something up from Cadence and Synopsys. And historically, if they're good enough, they just buy them. I think as of late, it's going to be a little harder for that to happen. But I do think that these companies have this like ridiculously weird moat because in theory, Google making their own EDA tools. You're like, yeah, sure, they can do that. Yeah, I would argue that
they're not going to market it to others in the same way that these two are, right?
Yeah, but like any really good chip design team can go make their own internal EDA flow. But the problem is, you have to maintain it and do this and all this work, and you also have to have like hundreds of them to make a leading edge chip. And so, yes, any company can go make one, but no company can go make 500. Right?
Is their revenue not linked to the number of chip designers? I guess it's linked to the volume of chip sales by chip designers, or what's it indexed to? Because my main concern is
I would say, it's so recently, it's sold on a per seat basis. But recently, the hyperscalers have become a new giant leg of a lot more design. But I want to also asterisk this with one little piece of information: is that the problem is that these stocks are expensive. They're really expensive for what they are. They're an amazing duopoly, and truly every once in a while they puke the bed, and that's like kind of when you want to buy them. But until then, you have to just be very patient.
Right, it's more expensive than Nvidia right now on a forward PE basis.
On a forward PE basis, yes. But they're also like very forever monopoly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I find them interesting. I kind of gawk at them from the sidelines. I bought, I think it was after end of Q4 earnings, they dropped. But then they ran up too quick, too fast, and now we just think they're pricey. But yeah, I think the question for me is how many seats are there, and does that top out at some point? There's only a finite number of chip designers. But you raise a great point. These like Visa, MasterCard, they're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and then
oligopoly.
also they're starting to add new products like the EDA design tool, like AI stuff, like that design logic I showed you before, right?
Right.
Yes, maybe Google X did that, but I would guess a lot of the AI EDA advancements are going to be done by the EDA tool companies themselves.
What do you think about SMCI? Right, it's obviously become kind of like a meme stock now. The returns have been incredible. They of course have an edge in custom build for the data center side.
I'm a little bit of a hater, I'm not gonna lie.
Okay, we like
Um,
non-consensus views, so it's okay. We welcome the hate. It's okay. It's a
so
safe
look,
space.
so look, SMCI at 300, sure. SMCI at 815. I think the problem here is that Nvidia likes to pawn off its players against everyone else, and so at some point in time, I think one of the reasons why SMCI did so well in last generation is actually for a hot second there, whenever Nvidia was putting out the reference design for their H100 HGX 8 CPU server rack. One of the big stopping points was that the original design of the NVIDIA specific product was that it was using Sapphire Rapids, and Intel was behind. So Intel's late product, the CPU, kind of made this weird market where selling an HGX 8X rack with with an AMD CPU was an amazing business, and SMCI was ready to do that like this. They were first. They already had the SKU. Boom, done. So they took a lot of share, became the incumbent, and definitely sold a lot of H100. But I think they're in the future successive generations. I think odds are that other companies are gonna, like watching an ODM feast like this doesn't really make sense. Yes, they are definitely good at making custom boards, but I don't think in the future of GB200s that they're going to be making excess rents like they have. And I guess, look, man, I think it's a great company, but any company that's gone up a 500%, like 5x in the last year, that isn't, truly like really, really, really changing the game in terms of like technical stuff. I just think
Yeah,
at this point in time, if you're, there are other places to go. Like,
I like.
I just
I think you're right.
I don't think that's the place to like, go. Like, I really do think there's a lot more risk here than perceived. Sure, it could go up, but I wouldn't feel a lot of regret because truthfully, at the end of the day, one of the ODMs when this whole cycle is over will go bankrupt, in my opinion. They'll have a ton of inventory. They can't write it
Oh
down. They'll
wow.
be levered and it might not be SMCI. Okay, it might be a Taiwanese ODM, but someone will get owned by this by just having tons and tons of inventory and the inability to sell it. So we'll see.
Right.
I
And look, it's
think
at the
I think
98th percentile of forward PE valuation over the last 10 years. And
yeah,
that's true for quite a few of these semiconductor stocks, including applied
agreed.
materials at the 100th percentile.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's actually kind of concerning. And part of it too is I do think forward PE is too low in terms of applied materials, but like is it 50% too low? No. Like
Meaning
so
you expect earnings will be higher than what analysts are
20,
expecting.
yes, 2025 is going to be a very good year for semicap. I would guesstimate that street consensus is something like high single digits for 2025, maybe double digits. I think it might be 15 to 20%. And so, hey, WFE at 15 at 20%, WFE for gate all around, something like that. The drop through on EPS might be very significant in a way that will probably shock your EPS on a forward basis. But at the same time, also this is a really good graph. I've never seen this one before. This is my biggest concern because everyone and their mom is waking up and being like, "Wow, we got to buy these freaking
Yeah.
semiconductors, right?" And
Right.
I will push back. Let me talk. Let me let's dissect some of this. I
Yeah.
will push back a little bit because semiconductors has been the best performing subsector for like 3 of the last 4 decades. Okay. I would argue one of the reasons why it's so cheap is because the cyclicality creates fear from investors, rightfully so. And so when the cycle goes down, they get to buy back shares. They have this awesome,
Yeah.
they have, there's a lot of reasons why it trades as cheap as it is, high risk, high reward. But I
Yeah.
do agree that semiconductors right now are at an extremely stretched multiple.
Right.
As someone who sells essentially a research product for professional investors or, maybe retail investors who are wanting to learn more about semiconductors, the amount of people who are interested in my space between when I started and now, completely different world. And so I think that is a risk, but at the same time, the cycle always happens. And when it does, fearful things happen. And so I want to actually argue that there are places within the semiconductor cycle where we are not seeing that. And I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Sure.
And so, like, for example, I feel like I'm pretty good at like dipping, dodging, and kind of getting where things are really interesting, where beat up things where everyone else is not so much focused on, and we can talk about some of that.
Yeah,
So,
and while you pull that up, just to add context for the folks on audio, so that prior screen showed the forward PE on semiconductors over a couple decades, and it was at the very highest band that we've seen.
Yeah. And so the way you want to do it is you want to buy cycles that are going through the cycle. And like Max Linear is a good example. I recently wrote it up. There's kind of a weird incentive thing here because the CEO took all stock options and they have this giant litigation over hanging it. So it's extremely hated. Okay. I think eventually their business, their cyclical aspects will turn around. But unlike other businesses where, people love to buy the bottoms of these things, people have not been buying the bottom of Max Linear at all. It's been kind of just a total dog for a while. I would say it's like 80% off its highs. I think odds are next year it trades at something like, low teens EPS. And so there are like ways to do this where, you don't have to go chasing the fancy, most ugly, like the fanciest, most hottest thing. Like I would argue, for example, a company like on Semi. Also, I think it's cute that we both use Quayfin. Love Rob and the team, but like on Semi, for example, has been a lot higher multiple for the last few years, and I think the forward is finally looking okay. This is a chance where I think that the last year returns, I think it's still down, and so there's ways to just not buy absolute, rocket ships when on cyclical bets, and I think that that's where it makes the most sense. So right now, the places I'm most excited for, for that reason, is automotive, because we're going through the cycle. These stocks are not at all-time highs. There is long-term potential where I think that things get a lot better. And yeah, we can kind of talk. Well, I mean, so like usually I have like an anti-momentum take, if that makes sense, where you don't want to buy. I'm not trying to chase the hottest, and I'm trying to buy companies that have real drivers at the bottom, that have real drivers, but are
I like On as a picks and shovels semiconductor play on the EVs trend. Actually, we owned that for a hot minute earlier this year, and then we realized that it was correlated thematically with all EVs, the end market, despite the fact that it's a different business model. And you can see it now; it's still correlated to Tesla. And that's the reason why we sold that. We were lucky enough to make some money on it, but after we kind of recognized that. So, I mean, I like that category of business model, and the valuation is a good valuation. It is, I do believe EVs are a secular trend, but you need other concentric circles of demand to come online, and other usability to make it more attractive, FSD adoption, all the rest. But I don't know. I'm not quite there yet, but I like the way you think. The other part on the semiconductors is that we are seeing negative revisions for the category overall. It varies company by company, but I think like the one of the hardest parts about being an investor is you spot a 10-year secular trend. We want to have exposure thematically to that, but sometimes the price is higher than what you want to pay, and the question is, how do you position around that?
Patience, baby. I mean, that's sitting on your hands is the hardest thing in the entire world to do, but I do think sometimes it's the right answer, right?
To wait for a pullback and a correction and then deploy, is what you're saying, right?
Patience, yeah. And then like there's also other opportunities. Like I do think like right now in the data center trade, people are chasing less Nvidia, but there's like other companies like Vertiv, which is also on a freaking
cooling company, right?
Yeah, or there's in the same way I talked about like, hey, the system thing and we're scaling out. You can bet on other aspects of the AI chain that are maybe a little bit more secular to come.
Right on. I'll pull up my data center watch list, see if you got any quick reactions on that. But yeah, I think when people think about AI, they jump to semis, but there are other plays, to your point, like the data center play, which has other providers, including like the cooling lane. Now, some of these names will overlap. Like Nvidia, as you know, is a data center play, a chip design play, a semiconductor play. But yeah, Vertiv is there. Wire, by the way, Wire was the one cheapest stock we found here. We saw this stock. We said, we love this thing. It's growing great. It's got a terrific valuation. And then it just got bought. Whoever bought that.
I don't know anything about Wire, to be honest with you.
It's it's not actionable now. Encore wire company. Here's a description. This is the one thing that had value in semiconductors. So manufacture and sale of electric building wires and cables in the U.S. Their 5-year CAGR net income growth 31%, 14.6 PE ratio, wildly
Go back to that
profitable.
list. I think there's some other companies that you should definitely consider. So
I'll
a
sort
good
this
example,
Go ahead.
you can argue that APH, Amphenol is going to be a big, like that could be selling the copper cables into the GP200 is going to be a very incremental business for them. You can argue that Comfort Systems, FIX, what they do is they sell modular data centers. And that's become a huge incremental driver for their business. There's a company called STRL. They actually reported today. They're honestly just a freaking construction company that is making data center shells. Beat the heck out of backlog stuff. And I think EME, which is maybe on your list, maybe it isn't. Those are other companies that are like kind of on the construction aspect. I think that there's been a lot more focus right now on companies that are going to be making, because like here's the thing, we did this giant inflection in liquid cooling, right? Vertiv and companies like that are definitely benefiting. But there's also this aspect here that in order for it to even support the liquid cooling, you need to have a lot of different infrastructure. The current data centers, you can argue VST, by the way, and CEG, those are companies that essentially are on non-regulated utilities. Now, I'm scared. I'm VST. Do not chase those stocks. Like straight up, those terrify the crap out of me. I do not understand them. But one of the reasons why they've ripped so much is because one of the single largest problem for scaling data centers these days is mostly focused around energy. Yeah. And so finding ways to make more energy in these shells has become the key critical the key critical problem here. And that's become this next part of this trade. And so I think the thing that's really interesting is the shells themselves are changing. Okay. In order for you to have a shell that has 100 megawatts or 200, 300 megawatts in it is a very different shell than the one that previously you had that had 20 megawatts. And so what we're seeing, I think, is that the data centers today physically cannot support the power energy requirements of a liquid cooled future data center. So what's happening is, and there's like an actual real chance, we'll see if it actually happens, that I think there's an actual chance that Nvidia revenue might even burp in the second half of this year, mostly on the basis that all the hyperscalers are going to be spending on shells, not just GPUs anymore. And because
I agree. I think energy. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, because they're going to be like, hey, that's really great that you have this GB200, but we literally cannot deploy it in the numbers like we did with the H100. We want to have 100,000, GB200 or B200 chips, and they're like, we have to do that liquid cooling. Okay, well, we cannot physically deploy that, and so there's been this big shift, I think, that will probably happen to building shells over GPUs. Now, I don't think Nvidia's like revenue is going to even be remotely impacted, and like maybe there'll be like where things don't grow as fast because there's a shift of orders to the next year where they're going to start to scale out these chips a lot more. So I think that that's something to consider.
Well said.
But in this point in time, shells matter.
No, I agree. Like the energy play is a very good one. We're focused on that too. We've seen nuclear renaissance here, betting on uranium. We bought TLNE, which is a lesser well-known nuclear utility play, right? Came out of bankruptcy. We wrote about in our Lumina newsletter on mid-Feb, got a really good entry point, 66. Now it's 97. So,
you want to know the dumbest, most speculative idea I can think of? And big asterisk. SMR.
Okay. Negative alpha. Which one? STR? Okay.
SMR.
Oh yeah, this is horrible. We are short this right now, by the way.
Oh yeah. Just so you know, I think this will work just reflexively.
Because of the theme and the idea, or
yes,
we're going to cover soon, but we do. I don't want people to copy trade us. We are very careful what we do in and out.
And to be clear, this is the most spicy little turd. I would not.
It seems like a BS company. Yeah, we did this like a few days ago.
So here's the thing. They are the only company with a small modular reactor that's approved by the Energy Commission. Okay. At the same time, do they have any kind of revenue? Any kind of product? Well, no. But could they drop a PR on us? The answer is also yes. So we'll see. We'll see, man.
I agree. And the trends have improved. The trend, like this bottomed out, this capitulated. The trend is now up. Sellers sold. So you want to be careful how you handle. But I don't think it's a real investment.
No,
it's a good hedge for other kinds of things.
Hey, man, look, I do believe in the reflexive universe a little bit, where hey, at some point in time, if there is a need great enough that they're going to be launching as many things as they can with a traditional nuclear infrastructure, I'm sure they can get
Right.
a little bit of flow.
Well,
and so, like,
yeah,
truthfully, this could actually work, in my opinion, over like 10 years.
I think,
but
we'll see innovation from Rolls-Royce, who's also looking to build small modular reactors. This is another stock that has absolutely ripped.
well, I was going to say this is ripped on the airplanes, right?
Yes, the turbine. They're a turbine manufacturer. Obviously, people think of them as luxury cars.
They don't have
but
any
yeah,
cars. Yeah, I was.
and we
I
got
was
Sam
long
Altman's
this.
company as well. That's gonna.
I was long this. I was long this company in late, like in extremely late 23, maybe even before that first gap up, and I puked it like 100% higher, and I'm really.
Oh wow, we just watched this thing go up. It's more expensive than Microsoft, so we're like, I like the recurring
basis.
revenue.
I mean, I literally I think I wrote about it in like November of 23 or something like that, and yeah, and I mean, it's been working. I mean, actually, let me even put it.
I
No,
think
it might
the
be earlier.
easier plays are like uranium and nuclear enrichment, one-step enrichment. Those names haven't quite run up. People woke up to Cameco. Goldman wrote a buy report on it a month ago. They reiterated that yesterday.
No, actually, sorry. I need a victory lap. I need a victory lap my newsletter a little bit.
Go ahead.
I wrote about Rolls-Royce in November 27 of 2022.
Oh wow, that would have been a fantastic entry point. Well, November 22 is the end of the bear market. That was perfect.
Yeah,
incredible.
It was a fantastic thing, and I freaking bought it. I made a ton of money on it, and I still hate myself for selling some. Anyways, I don't know. Any other topics? Because I think I got it right.
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. This is fantastic. So, I recommend those that are listening to the content, you should subscribe to Fabricated Knowledge. We read it. We really enjoy it. This is a real treat. Doug, as you can see, knows his content inside and out, and his content is enormously valuable. You can follow him on Twitter. And Doug, how else can people follow you and stay in touch?
Yeah, I would just say Twitter is probably the best way. Fab Knowledge on Twitter is the best way to probably follow up. My free newsletter obviously is like honestly more than enough. I do feel like I put a generous amount of free content out there. And yeah, I think that's the best way to keep interacting with me. And yeah, I do podcasts like this, and I think my DMs are still open, but yeah, I mostly just interact with people who interact with my newsletter. So that's the best way to keep up with me.
Terrific. Thank you. So Nvidia is going to beat Raise. I think we're both probably in the same boat there, but what do you think the price reaction is? That's the last question.
I don't know, dude. Sometimes as of late, honestly, as of late, everything is a positioning problem, right? Because your question is how many people are long into the quarter at the pods. That's the real question.
Right. I agree.
And the answer to that is I don't know. Like, one of my friends said this to me, and this was like, back when I worked in like the before pod time, okay? Which I mean, I still think is like before pods, essentially. I think if you got the press release of the results, in like MNPI or whatever, like someone gave it to you one day in advance. They gave you the feature one day in advance. You could trade money on and make money on it. These days, I actually don't think you can. You would have to know everything. You'd have to know more about positioning, right? Hey, a beat or whatever, not a big enough beat. So you have to, like if we're talking about like short-term price reaction on Nvidia, buddy, that's a question about how many people are, how fast money is long it, right? And so you can give me the press release, and I don't know. I need to know positioning about it, which is kind of messed up.
Well said. Well said. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Doug. Really appreciate it. We'll have to do it again sometime. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.